Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. A new school year has begun. I'm sure that kids today feel much the same excitement and dread previous generations felt as they face the new academic year. Young people have a lot on their minds, but I doubt if any of them are worried about poison in the schoolhouse. Nevertheless, that's the great danger in our schools, poison. Not from some unknown pollutant lurking in the walls, lead in the paint, or asbestos in the ceiling. It's a mental and spiritual poison skulking in the school's books, films, and curricula. This kind of poison kills more thoroughly than cyanide, but thankfully, there is an antidote. Last year on this program, I took you on a tour of education in America, focusing mostly on high school. Tonight, let's graduate and head for university. Even if you have a pretty good idea of what's coming, you better buckle up for this one. It ain't pretty. You've heard me discuss my years on America's campuses. You've heard me warn about the alarming rise of Marxism and communism on those campuses. I've told you about the unbelievable tide of atheism, agnosticism, and secularism that is crashing through the faculties and student bodies of America's colleges. Suffice it to say that when your child goes away to a public or private secular university, you will probably not recognize him or her when they return home. That's how devastatingly effective university faculties have become at corrupting and co-opting our children. But now those educators have embarked on a new tactic. No longer are they seeking to influence your children away from America's founding values of personal responsibility, free enterprise, and democracy. They're actively trying to destroy their basic moral and spiritual values. Here are just a few of the hundreds, if not thousands, of examples occurring on campuses across the United States. The University of South Carolina Upstate scheduled an LGBTQ seminar. What's that, you say? LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning. The seminar was scheduled to include a session called How to Be a Lesbian in 10 Days or Less, presented by someone who calls herself an expert lesbian. It was to be paid for in part by university funds. When campus reform ran a story on it, several state senators became incensed over the idea that taxpayer-funded institutions should pay for such a thing, and they were able to stop it. One of those state senators was Lee Bright. He said, "Our state's system of higher education has been hijacked into spreading a liberal social and political agenda which is morally repugnant to the overwhelming majority of South Carolinians." While I agree with Senator Bright's comments, I don't think they go far enough. It isn't just higher education that has been hijacked, it's all of public education, and to a large extent, all formal education. As I go through the rest of this short list to give you an idea about what's happening in America's universities, remember that they set the agenda for our public schools. They create curricula for preschoolers as much as they do for college freshmen. Politicians and media turn to academics for answers on everything from global warming to how you should raise your child. So if we see poison bubbling up in the universities, be assured that it spreads from there to all society, including pulpits, newscasts, entertainment, and government with stunning speed and efficiency. In May, an event at the University of California at Los Angeles, or UCLA, encouraged students to perform a certain sexual activity instead of studying for finals. They held a workshop entitled, "Finals Can Wait, Masturbate," sponsored by a group that calls itself the LGBTQIAA, and progressive sorority. Unbelievable, but true. That stands for, now get this, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, ally, and asexual. At this rate, it can't be long before bestiality and pedophilia will be among those represented in these bizarre coalitions. But they're not only allowed on today's campuses, they're encouraged by school administrations. Today, it's common for universities across the nation to sponsor campus-wide observance called Sex Week. Such events usually feature seminars on various forms of sadomasochism and other things, the titles of which would have been enough to make a sailor blush just a few years ago. Now, I'm a former sailor, so I can testify to that. It's outrageous. The University of Tennessee uses student fees to pay for the week of debauchery. The state legislature had to intervene to allow students who don't want to support such activities to opt out of having their student fees used for the event. Tiffany Leeper, founder of Girls Against Porn and Human Trafficking, said, "The university is potentially violating Tennessee law by not reviewing the content of Sex Week in depth and materials brought by those invited. The university is also violating the Department of Education's Civil Rights Letter of Finding requiring policies that prohibit sexual harassment-related activities that create a hostile and sexually charged environment for females on campus." Is it surprising, with all the emphasis on sex, as if it were the one and only true pleasure in life, that there is today an epidemic of rape on campus? At Oklahoma State, students are now required to take a sexual assault course. How bad have things become when a major university concludes that young people come to its campus, have gone from birth all the way to college, and still need to be told that rape is simply wrong? Of course, why should we expect anything less from a culture that sees right and wrong as merely relative concepts subject to change depending on circumstances and environment? At Chico State University in California, the local chapter of Intervarisy Christian Fellowship has been found guilty of discrimination for requiring the group's leader to be a Christian. Imagine the audacity of a Christian club that wants to be led by Christians. As a result, Intervarsity, which has been active on American campuses since 1938, has now been de-recognized by all 23 schools in the California State University system. At graduations across country last spring, universities gave special graduation cards to gay and lesbian graduates. Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, hitherto an all-women's college, has officially adopted a policy that will allow them to admit anyone who simply identifies as a woman. I wonder what happens if a guy's feelings about his femininity change at mid-semester. Can he at least finish out the term? Following a major cheating scandal in 2012, a new study of Harvard students shows that 17% admit to cheating in academics. Since cheating and lying are first-cousin offenses, we can assume that a lot of cheaters also lied, and that the number of cheaters is higher than 17%. The influence of Harvard graduates is wildly disproportionate to their numbers. Probably more than any other university, their alumni run the country. That makes this a frightening statistic indeed. I believe that one of the worst things you can do with your money is give it to a secular university. Wonderful Christian people often put these institutions in their wills, sometimes giving millions to universities already reeking of money. And despite the beautiful buildings and overpaid football coaches, the main thing these donors are helping the institution to do is corrupt the young. How much wealth do state universities have? enough that they can heedlessly throw cash to the wind. In 2012, Bill Clinton spoke at UCLA. They gave him $250,000 for one speech. If an organization can afford to pay someone $250,000 an hour, do they need your money? Then this year, UCLA invited Hillary Clinton to speak. Her fee? $300,000. And the next 2 years, you can expect to hear Hillary and Bill all over television and live appearances across the country and not pay a dime. I suspect you'll hear them and see them until you are sick of them. But UCLA paid over $500,000 for the privilege of their presence for 2 hours. The conclusion is obvious. UCLA must have money to burn. David Campbell, a professor at Grinnell College, is full of praise for the way the Chinese government is handling the country's pollution problem. He said, authoritarian governments can make rapid decisions. Sometimes they're benign. More often than not, they're malignant. But by and large, I think the Chinese government in the last few decades has been very enlightened. Why American academics love communist countries is beyond me. Despite its forced one-child-per-couple policy, China puts out more pollution than any nation on the planet, bar none. It's hardly a role model for the environmentalists. Professor Hilary Mann Leverett of American University appeared on MSNBC not long ago and made the startling claim that anti-Semitism doesn't exist in the Middle East. Either the professor is misinformed or disingenuous, neither of which are complimentary for someone considered an expert in foreign policy in the Middle East. As far as I know, she still has the job. She's still teaching kids, and her position continues to imply that she is an intellectual role model. Still talking about anti-Semitism, Ms. Leverett went on to say, there's no history of that in the Middle East. There's not this deep-seated Arab-Jewish or, Muslim-Jewish animosity. And on we go through the looking glass, down the rabbit hole, and into the dark mind of modern academia, where good is evil and evil is good, and where people who did not like to retain God in their knowledge have been given over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. I'll have more on the treacherous influence of America's universities in future programs. For now, we need to uphold in prayer our children who are attending those colleges and earnestly pray for those who are called to minister to America's students. There's a mighty spiritual war being fought on those campuses, and it will determine not only our nation's future, but the eternal destinies of millions of our children. Become prayerfully aware of what our schools and universities are teaching our children. For Christian parents, it will probably be a terrifying awakening. Take action now before it's illegal to protest. Your children's and grandchildren's futures are at stake. John F. Kennedy once said, "Victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan." The disastrous American foreign policy of the last few years has even its architects disclaiming it. Most observers believe that the Islamic State, also known as ISIS, has succeeded at least partly because of the vacuum created when U.S. forces left the country 3 years ago. And at the end of most of America's wars, we have left a contingent force on the ground. In Iraq, we didn't, but we should have, and now everyone knows it. President Obama understands this. He has often explained that he was unable to negotiate an acceptable agreement with the Iraqis that would have allowed some U.S. troops to remain. In other words, the president is blaming the situation on a failure of diplomacy, primarily his own. but
to
also
the Assad regime's contempt for its own people. In peace.
In 2011, many observers felt that he didn't push for a long-term U.S. role because he didn't want one. He didn't seem to appreciate the strategic advantage of a U.S. force on the ground in that key location. One of the really good things that the Iraq War should have bought for us. Hillary Clinton blames Obama for the Islamic State, but for a different reason. Along with the Republican Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, she believes the United States should have armed the so-called moderate Muslim rebels fighting President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. In her book, Hard Choices, she wrote, "The risk of both action and inaction were high, but the president's inclination was to stay the present course and not take the significant further step of arming rebels. No one likes to lose a debate, including me, but this was the president's call, and I respected his deliberations and decisions." She and others believe that if America had empowered the moderates with weapons and air support 2 years ago, Assad could well have been gone today. With moderates running Syria, and ISIS might never have come into being. I disagree. I believe the phrase moderate Muslim rebels is an oxymoron. Those three words just don't go together. If we had given the so-called moderate rebels all the weapons Senator McCain asked for at the time, and if we had fully supported those rebels with airstrikes, I think it would have all been to the benefit of the Islamic State. Today, ISIS would not only be ruling eastern Syria and northern Iraq, but the ISIS flag would also be flying over Damascus. All of Syria, with its hidden chemical weapons, its anti-aircraft systems, its tanks and heavy armor, and its sophisticated air power, would be under the control of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and his new caliphate. Israel and Jordan would be under their guns, and the entire Middle East would be even more of a cauldron of violence than it is today. At a recent press conference, NBC's Chuck Todd asked the president, "You have said that Assad has lost legitimacy to lead. Defeating ISIS could help Assad keep power. Talk about how you prioritize those two pieces of your foreign policy." The president answered,
"I don't think there's a situation where we have to choose between Assad or the kinds of people who carry on the incredible violence that we've been seeing there. We will continue to support a moderate opposition inside of Syria, in part because we have to give people inside of Syria a choice other than ISIL or Assad.
But if he really believed in the moderate opposition, wouldn't he have armed them long ago? The world scene feels like a puzzle where the pieces cannot be made to fit, and there's no picture on the box to show us how the puzzle is supposed to look when it's completed. So, what's the answer? If you've watched Ann Coulter for more than 30 seconds, you probably have an opinion about her. Some say brilliant, others say abrasive, some say insightful, while still others say she's dumb as a box of rocks. Whatever your opinion, you must admit that she is a world-class provocateur. She may make you mad, but she always will make you think. One of her most controversial moments came in a 2001 column 3 days after 9/11. She wrote about radical Islam. We should invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity. For Christians, conversion at the point of a sword misses the whole point of redemption. At a cost to God that included the cross, a cost we cannot fathom, he gave us free will. If it was that important to him, why would we try to eliminate free will by pointing a gun at someone and saying, convert or else? But she was right about one thing. Jesus is the answer. A few weeks ago, Ms. Coulter wrote about Kent Brantley, the doctor with Samaritan's Purse who contracted Ebola while serving the people of West Africa. Coulter wrote, "Can't anyone serve Christ in America anymore?" No, because we're doing just fine. Then she enumerated some of America's problems to show that we're not really doing just fine, and that American Christians have plenty to do right here at home. She's right that America desperately needs the gospel, but she doesn't understand the Great Commission, which begins in our own backyard, but extends to the uttermost part of the earth. Part of Coulter's response to 9/11 was to force Muslims to convert. So she clearly sees conversion of Muslims as the key. Well, a quarter of the world's Muslims live in Africa. Forced conversion does not work. You can force Christianity onto people's lives, but not into their hearts. But Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12 says, "The word of God is living and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart." That's the sword we Christians use to convert people. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." The battle is spiritual. As young David told Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 47, "The Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's." Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6 says, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." Even though Ms. Coulter thinks the key is to convert Muslims, she equates missionary service to Christian narcissism. She implies that missionaries in Africa are a waste of money. Even from an entirely secular perspective, that's not true. If not for the Christian missionary movement of the last 2 centuries, the African continent would be solidly and radically Muslim today. In the year 1900, there were only 9 million Christians in all of Africa. Today, there are well over 330 million. If present growth patterns continue, there will be 633 million Christians in Africa by 2025. And they stand on the front lines against Islam. A few years ago, conservative commentator Michael Medved said something astounding on his radio show. This Jewish man said the best thing people can do for the future of the world is to give money to Christian missionary organizations. Even from his non-Christian perspective, it made sense. In the entire world, only the gospel of Christ can stand against radical Islam. From a Christian perspective, it's even more obvious. We hold in our Bibles and in our hearts the antidote to Islamic jihad. It's called the truth. And in the Bible, truth has a name: Jesus. He said, "I am the truth." We must send the gospel. We must send it over the airwaves and in great meetings, but we must also share the gospel person to person in America and around the world. Jesus said, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a witness to all the nations, and then the end shall come." The whole world includes the Muslim world. It includes North Korea, China, and even American universities. I said at the beginning of this program that there's an antidote for the lies that poison our classrooms. That antidote is the truth. It's Jesus. Can the Lord use you and your friends in this great undertaking? As Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "The Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few." Yes, He wants to use you. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus himself gave us a prayer request. The harvest is plentiful, he said, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. With the right field standing before us, we are each to pray that prayer, and we're also to be the answer to that prayer. I pray that you will be able to really investigate the things that I've said tonight. Well, folks, God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 741.